So while Odysseus is over there on the island of Scheria, getting magnificent, wonderful, overwhelming hospitality from the Phaeacians, I thought you and I could take a half step back and introduce the first of what I'm going to be calling our conceptual tools. In this class, we're going to spend lots of time looking at these great stories, trying to get interested in them, find the details in them, show the wonder that they are, just enjoy them for what they are. But also I want to spend some time lifting up the hood and tinkering with what's underneath there, trying to figure out how these things work. What is it that makes a myth a myth? In the early part of the course, we laid down some ideas over a broad sweep of time. We did a real broad and quick survey of ideas on myth over time, talked about some that existed in the classical period, talked about functionalism and allegorism in particular and how those survived through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, and then the different ideas that emerged in the Renaissance from people like Fontenelle, who talk about myth as a kind of proto-scientific mentality, an attempt to explain the world around us. We talked about the Enlightenment and David Hume, who thought about myth as a kind of early primitive mentality that, thank goodness, we scientific-minded people have grown out of. And then we talked about the Romantics and their much more swelling view of myth as a repository for the most powerful truths that humans might find. Now, fast forwarding ahead from the Romantic period into the 20th century, we're going to pick out and focus on 4 specific schools of thought that are going to give us some useful ways of tinkering with the myths in front of us. So what I hope to do here is to start building a box of tools. And when we run into things in myth that are strange or interesting, we can pick out one of the tools, tinker with the myth, and see if we get something interesting. First one I want to talk about is functionalism. The figure Branislaw Malinowski is our important figure here. His dates are 1884 to 1942. Malinowski, an important figure in the human sciences, made tremendous advances, a critical figure in anthropology, and also very interesting for people that study myth. Malinowski studied the cultures nearby him and noticed that they told stories and that these stories got repeated over and over and that they took place at certain kinds of critical times. There were moments when mythic stories were turned to in the society and they had a central role in the building of culture. More importantly, Malinowski noticed that there was a specific way that these stories were used by the cultures. Specifically, Malinowski said that myths and when cultures tell myths to themselves, what they're doing is legitimizing certain kinds of underlying social and cultural norms that they hold dear. So myths are myths because they serve a certain kind of function. And the function they serve is that they legitimize. So myths are there, and we enjoy hearing them because they have this underlying kind of subterranean, always, function to them. They serve a purpose. They're not just there to delight and entertain us or to give us diversions or teach us about the sort of universal structure of the cosmos. Instead, they're there to reassure us that our cultural norms and our social values are the right ones. The stories are told in such a way that they have an underlying message that endorses our cultural views on the world. So myths serve the function of legitimizing. Now, a few things we can pull out, a few notes we can make on this already at this early stage. You'll tell from the lecture we just gave that ideas of functionalism have already been a part of the course, haven't they? I snuck a functionalist reading into the prior lecture. When we started talking about xenia and this cultural value of overwhelming hospitality and the usefulness in Greek culture as securing a means of trade, securing a kind of safe territory for people to trade, different cultures to trade among themselves. And then we claimed that the story that we're being told with Odysseus and his time on Scheria with the Phaeacians, when we're being told that that story helps underline and legitimize the social and cultural value of xenia, we're being given a functionalist reading. You and I as Greeks love to hear this story. And if someone asks us why, well, we'll just say, well, it's just a great story. We just love to hear it. What Malinowski will come along and say is the reason that the Greeks loved to hear this story is because it legitimized their investment in this cultural value of xenia and made it seem like it was a normal, natural thing. What we're doing then is jumping into a functionalist reading. Now, our toolbox is going to get full of a couple of other different tools. We're going to talk about structuralism pretty soon, in fact. We're going to talk about psychoanalysis, and we're also going to talk about another theory called myth and ritual. Functionalism, structuralism, psychoanalysis, and myth and ritual. These will be the four main tools in our toolbox, and when we have need of them and see usefulness to them, we'll take the tool out, tinker with the myth, and see what results we get. Our tools are not all going to get along with each other. They have different ideas on myth. Some of them would, people who are adherents of one theoretical approach might eschew the usefulness of another theoretical approach, but you and I are going to be friends with all these theoretical tools, and we're going to put them to use when appropriate to try to understand our myths. I think also you're going to find them useful in your own reading of the myths. I'm going to put them to use in our class, and I'll label them whenever I recognize myself using one of these theoretical tools, but also keep your own eyes open, and maybe there'll be one or two times when I'm sneaking in a functionalist reading, or once in a while I'll sneak in a psychoanalytic reading, or one of the other kinds of approaches that we have in the class, and you'll say to yourself, aha, Strzok's actually being a functionalist here, and he doesn't even realize it. That's great. That's exactly the kind of thing you should be doing. And then start to realize yourself also when you start to do certain kinds of intuitive readings of the myths. When you run into them, you know, this one seems like it's actually operating this way, or it's operating in another way. You'll be able to give some names to the kinds of habits of mind that are probably already in place for you. One or two small pieces of functionalism to close before we leave Malinowski. Notice that when someone does a functionalist reading, what they're interested in is not the origin of the myth. We're not talking about when the myth emerged or where it came from. Instead, we're interested in what culture now is telling this myth to itself. And we're going to propose that the reason a culture tells any myth to itself is because that myth helps underline, legitimize, and verify their social and cultural norms and values. Okay? So origin is not important when it comes to functionalism. Instead, the use of the myth in the time when the myth is being told, that's what the functionalist is most interested in. Interested in function, thus the name. Myths, according to a functionalist, also a final note, are interested not in grand universal unveiling of deep human truth, right? You can take a look at what a functionalist really is looking at, and that's going to be the specifics of individual cultures. So hearkening back to an earlier comment we made right at the very beginning of this class, we talked about the different contemporary ideas of myth and how some people will claim that myths contain universal truths, and other people will claim that myths contain specific cultural truths. The functionalists are definitely on the specific cultural side of that divide. They look at myths as being a window into the particularities of a certain kind of culture. Cultures value different things. We may think it would be absolutely second nature for us to value the kind of things that we're talking about, for example, hospitality or whatever it might be, but in fact, different cultures approach these things in different ways. Some of the values that Greek culture wants to underline, legitimize, and support are going to seem absolutely straightforward to us. Others are going to seem really strange. So keep our eye on both of those. So watch out for the tools. We're going to add them to our toolbox every few weeks here for the next part of the course, and soon enough we'll have a box full of 4 different tools, and we'll use them to tinker with our myths and see what we can make out of them as we advance in the course.